We've got Leonora Langley in the studio with us. Hi, Leonora. How's it going?
Good morning. Lovely to meet you all.
Lovely to have you in. We brought you in, Leonora, to tell us about your book, and you've been telling me about it a little over the phone. So it's lovely to have you in with us. Why did you feel that this book needed to be made? You said it's like a culmination of elements of everything in your past, and you had to do it. Tell us why.
Absolutely. Ever since I was a young girl, I had a feeling that children's voices weren't really being heard. And I suppose it became more apparent when I was a teacher in my 20s and I faced a class of 6 and 7-year-olds. And they seemed to be so vulnerable, impressionable, and virtually at the mercy of their parents and educators. And that's a huge responsibility for adults. And I thought that I needed to give them a voice because they don't always have a voice. But it wasn't until much later, when I had my own son and went through parenthood and trained as a counsellor, that I began to see things with greater clarity. And I wasn't going to write a book until I really felt that I had quite a lot of expertise on the subject. So lockdown presented me with a time to go back to my history. I was a journalist for 15 years. I lived in Los Angeles for 7 and interviewed a vast array of celebrities. It's a similar challenge in the classroom. There you are facing 30 children. They're like empty vessels, and I wanted to fill them with more than just cognition and logic, which can be counted and measured. I also wanted to help nurture their emotional stability and their soul development. I think we're all here on the planet with a soul's journey. And for me, that needs to be fulfilled creatively, often through the arts. Children are innately curious and imaginative. And I think we tend to stifle that a lot in schools because there's too much pressure on exam results, league tables, and government initiatives. And that also stifles teachers' soul development. They can be soul destroyed by having to deliver it.
Absolutely. That when you're sort of in that circle of work and just having a timetable, it doesn't give you anything to work with, does it? It's just, produce these results, please. You mentioned that you'd gone out of your way to do things differently.
I was always a bit of a rebel, and I sometimes, especially when I was a supply teacher, if I thought the children weren't engaged, I sometimes came off what was asked of me and just had an open question time on matters that they wanted to know about. And when the bell went for break time, they didn't want to leave because they were inspired because it was a subject that was meaningful to their lives in the now, going through teenage life, which is really challenging.
Yes.
And also for their future development.
Because you can maybe see that knock-on effect in later life. I don't know whether it's because mental health is being more well recognised now, or that possibly people always had this problem when I think in your 20s, when you start to wonder, who am I? What am I doing? I've got all this knowledge from school that I don't seem to be using. Am I a failure, kind of thing? Would you say that this would help?
Well, the thing is that since the 1870s, our education system has barely moved away from a Victorian ethic, a sort of a 19th century model of too much emphasis, as I said earlier, on cognition and logic, because it can be counted and measured. Obviously, there's got to be aims in education, and the two main aims have been about the transmission of a body of knowledge and cultural values from one generation to the next. And also we have to produce a productive workforce. But I think that education needs to be about the development of self-actualization and a true sense of self-awareness. And it's almost like we have to help them develop radical self-love. Because at the moment there's too much emphasis on external validation, which they can get through computers and social networking. But that doesn't really give them the resource for later on, when they will definitely have challenge and adversity in their lives, but we're not really equipping them to deal with that. For instance, how to form a relationship, how to cope with the breakup of a relationship, how to deal with a bereavement.
That's something that's not spoken about very often at all. People avoid that as much as they possibly can. It doesn't feel very healthy, really.
Well, the thing is, Cassie, I think that all teachers need to be trained, or I don't even like the word trained, but to explore their own psychological development. In other words, all teachers need a psychological component whereby they learn about transactional analysis that Eric Byrne talked about, and the various ego states that we all play out on a day-by-day basis. And without that, teachers just won't be equipped to be able to help children with their feelings and emotions, which I think are absolutely paramount. It's not what children think about learning, it's also how they feel about it. I think all children are innately creative and curious and imaginative, but sometimes it hasn't been nurtured in those years, preschool years. But we as teachers need to bring it out because it is in every child. Every single child has talents. And even if it's for an ability to be empathic with their peers.
Yeah.
I think that's an amazing talent.
That is something that takes a lot of honing, I think. You can start being quite callous as a child. You see in schools how cruel children can be to each other. But you develop that empathy as you get older. So there's no class in that. But if you were trained in it, as you were saying, let's say trained, you didn't like sort of aware.
Aware, that's it. Yeah. To bring to awareness. I'm not very keen on the word trained.
Yeah.
And I don't really like the idea of even training a dog. I never train my dog. I just guide. I think guidance is a wonderful word. I don't even like the word discipline particularly. I do think it's about guiding our children in the right way. Of course, that takes a tremendous amount of patience and diligence on the part of an adult.
Yes.
And adults now are so frenetic out in the workplace that sometimes I think they've forgotten how to truly relate to their children. And we're almost making them into adults before their time. I talk about co-creation between parent and child, between teacher and child. Sometimes teachers are afraid of losing their power in the classroom because they think that the discipline's will just disappear. But that's not the case. I think if the child respects the teacher, and there are ground rules, I do think that every classroom needs to have ground rules where every person is trying to work together towards a certain behaviour pattern within the classroom. I mean, gentle stuff, but you've still got to forgive children if they can't adhere to those guidelines. Otherwise, they clam up and they just don't want to express themselves emotionally. Getting back to children's addiction to computers and social media, I think it causes hyperstimulation that puts children into the sympathetic fight or flight mode, which leads to the overproduction of cortisol in their brains. And that's what causes them anxiety, depression, and stress. Children need more opportunities to be in the parasympathetic mode through greater emphasis on the arts, meditation, mindfulness.
That's a big thing now, isn't it? Especially in the workplace, really pushing the mindfulness, because I can see how it would have a major effect on children. But I think even I feel my attention span shrinking. Being on social media all the time as an adult, I'm still very much influenced by all of that.
Well, apparently we have a attention span of 20 minutes. That's always been said in the last, say, couple of decades, but maybe it shrunk. It's such a sort of a quicksilver world. We keep moving from one thing to another. But I think children need time. They go at a different pace from us, intrinsically. And we keep telling them to hurry up, come on. How about treating them as human beings instead of human doings? That's what we are. We come in as sentient beings from birth. Before very long, unfortunately, because of the way our society is structured and because women are out in the workplace, they're subjected to repression, suppression, intimidation, indoctrination, and that's bewildering to a child, and they'll go along with it because they're forced to bond with the only mother they have. And sometimes, as Alice Miller said in her book, one of her books, she wrote a lot about childhood abuse. She was the first one to really write in depth about it. And she said that prisoners in a concentration camp were allowed to hate their persecutors, but children don't have a choice. So children always want to please the adult, which is a sad state of affairs. They've got nowhere to go, they can't run away, and they're forced to bond with the only parents they have.
We've got a song for you that you've requested, Cats in the Cradle by Harry Chapin. So we'll put that on after the break, and then we'll come back and we'll talk some more about your book.
Thank you.
We're going to start with a poem your sister wrote that's part of the book. So here's an exclusive preview if you're considering purchasing the book.
This is extracts from my sister's song, Love Leads Us Home. Her name is Felicity Buerski, and she spent her life developing 4 albums, One Woman's Journey from Illusion to Light. She calls it The Wayfarer. And I put her poem in the back of my book because she helped me form the parenting section. She had a completely different experience of our childhood to me, and that can happen even if you have the same parents. She's always talking about choosing love over fear in all our interactions in life, especially in our schools. We inoculate our children with the virus of our fear and make sure to top it up with every passing year. We make them feel alone at school and at home. We monitor their progress with unhealthy competition, create jealousy and hatred and children of perdition. Keep them in splendid isolation where there's no contamination, so the family can survive, though more dead than alive. Divide and rule at home at school, calling one child wise calls the other a fool. One we can despise and the other one adore. Polarized projections of the self we love and hate. Can we heal the split inside our souls before it's all too late?
That's really lovely. I suppose, did she write that? She didn't write that for your book. But
she didn't. She wrote it in 1997, but because she's got a similar interest in the human condition, and especially towards our children's emotional well-being, it seemed totally right to put it in the book. It fitted so well.
It really does seem to fit really well. Where can people buy the book if they would like to buy the book?
Most of my sales seem to be done through Amazon, but also you can get it from my publishers, Austin Macaulay, W.H. Smith, Waterstones, all good bookshops. They can access it, don't always have it in stock. I suppose the easiest way to get it is through Amazon. It's not a book I wrote for any materialistic gain. I think we need to encourage our children to an ordinary life. Some parents put so much pressure on their children to achieve, to become Renaissance people. But that's not what it's really about. I find that out through my son, who's highly sensitive. And all he says to me is, Mum, I just want to be happy.
That's the most important thing. And I think with school, you find people often go, "Oh, I'm not going to use that in my life," and you say, "Oh no, it's transferable skills," but you often find yourself you find yourself at the end of school waiting to start a career and not knowing what to do or what skills to use.
We need to try and create integrated human beings. Our children need the physical, the intellectual, the social, the spiritual, and of course the emotional. Otherwise, they're going to become lopsided adults. Academia doesn't bring us happiness, to be honest, I don't think. It might get us a job, but in the long term, what brings us happiness is our creativity, which is totally innate within us, and it needs to be recognised, developed, and then we fly. But at the moment, it's just too much emphasis on testing. Apparently, they're now going to be testing 4-year-olds as soon as they get to school on their basic English and maths ability. And parents are up in arms outside Number 10 quite recently, a few days ago, saying our children are not capable of being tested yet, because children up until the age of 7, they're operating in the alpha and theta brainwave cycle mode, which is closely aligned to an adult state of hypnosis or meditation.
They're still learning, aren't they? There's so much stuff that we could never hope to absorb in as much volume as a child does. Language and reading, and that's enough.
Yeah.
Just let them get on.
Let them be.
Yeah.
Let them discover. Let them... sitting at a desk, to me, is so restrictive. I think they need to be out, convening with nature, going on a beautiful nature walk, forest bathing, forest school, where they're looking and trying to discover their place within the world. Otherwise, they're going to suffer later on with depression, stress, and angst, as they are now. And self-harming is so much on the increase, as is suicidal ideation.
Which you find in caged animals as well, don't you? Self-harm. Not that I'm comparing children to animals, but I think
we need to. I think we need to, Cassie.
Yeah.
Why are we so very different? They're sentient beings too. Our animals are sentient beings, and we don't treat them very nicely. I really feel that since 1988, when the national curriculum was introduced, that suddenly the curriculum became the heart of education and learning. Instead of the children need to be at the very heart of the educational system. I feel so strongly about this. We're inflicting too much pressure on our young when they should be carefree and in the careless rapture of childhood. I just think that we really need to reassess what we're doing to our children, because they are the future. They're the future custodians of the world. It's a very, very important subject, and one that I care deeply about, and I'm passionate about it. It's the only book I ever wanted to write.
You can absolutely tell, like, the way you speak about it. I said on the phone, it sounds like your opus, which I think is a really good way. So if you want to purchase the book, you can do it on Amazon and Austin Macaulay. Yes. So, but we'll also put up a link on our social media. Thank you so much for coming in to chat to us.